Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Arabiya headquarters. These are our top headlines. US officials have said they would like to see elections held in Syria as soon as possible. The US strikes Houthi targets in Yemen. And the world rings in the new year with spectacular firework displays. Thailand is ringing in the New Year. Celebrations in Bangkok are known for their vibrant energy and stunning festivities. Fireworks light up the Chao Phraya River in the capital city. Now to our top story. In Damascus, a US delegation has held talks with Syria's interim government to discuss key priorities following the fall of Bashar al-Assad's regime. The American embassy shared updates highlighting critical issues such as countering extremist groups, preventing Iran's resurgence and protecting US citizens. The delegation also stressed the importance of uncovering information about the fate of Austin Tice and other Americans still missing. US officials have said they would like to see elections take place in Syria as soon as possible, just days after the new leader exclusively told Al Arabiya that it may take up to 4 years before those elections are held. Meanwhile, Austin Tice is an award-winning American journalist who went missing at a checkpoint near Damascus in August 2012. Weeks after his disappearance, a video surfaced showing him blindfolded and being led by armed men. But there has been no sign of him since. The Syrian government has denied holding him, but with the fall of Assad and the rise of new interim authorities, new leads on Tice's whereabouts could emerge. President Joe Biden has said that his administration believes that Tice is alive, but it is still working to locate his whereabouts.
Do you guys know about where Austin Tice might be and if he's safe?
We believe he's alive. We think we can get him back, but we have no direct evidence of that yet. And Assad should be held accountable.
Let's turn our focus to Yemen, where the US has carried out multiple strikes against Houthi targets. The attacks have reportedly hit targets in the capital Sana'a and coastal locations in Yemen. The US Central Command says it has targeted a command and control facility and sites that produce and stored weapons, notably missiles and also drones. Referencing the strikes, the US Central Command says that the facilities targeted were used to attack US warships and merchant vessels in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. The American Navy and Air Force also reportedly destroyed a Houthi radar site, 7 cruise missiles and a drone. The strikes are part of US efforts to degrade Iran-backed Houthi efforts to threaten regional partners. Now, for more on this, I'm joined by Mick Mulroy, a former United States Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East, who joins us from Whitefish in Montana. Mick, thank you so much for joining us this evening. US Central Command has confirmed that the US hit Houthi targets across Yemen this evening. Do we know anything about the targets and the reasons why they have been hit today?
So good to be with you and your audience. I think Central Command, so the command in the U.S. military that covers Yemen, has a very long list of targets they would like to strike. In Yemen, some of them probably already pre-approved, some that have to go up to the president. It sounds like what they did here is standard when it comes to military targeting. Go after the command and control, which includes the leadership, and then their capacity to strike, which is the manufacturing facilities and the arsenals that hold already manufactured weapon systems, like these advanced systems that can hit Tel Aviv and hit some of the ships transiting through the Red Sea. And it sounds like with that is what they have been doing. So this isn't much different, potentially different when it comes to what level of the command they went after. But I would expect that this will continue and maybe increase substantially once the administration shifts from Biden administration to second Trump administration.
As you mentioned, the Houthis are continuing to launch strikes on commercial vehicles in the Red Sea and Israeli cities, despite recent strikes by Israel, the UK and also the US. How much of an impact are these strikes really having on the militant group?
So it's difficult to determine, of course, because we don't know how many strikes they would have done if there was no attempt to mitigate it. It could be 3 times as many missiles and drones hitting ships and Tel Aviv, for example. So I think they should set a reasonable expectation, the coalition that's trying to mitigate the Houthis and basically state the obvious, what the Houthis won't back down. But what can be done is that their ability to launch these strikes can be mitigated or potentially even eliminated. It depends on how much the international community is willing to commit toward doing that. If they do, it could be reduced substantially. I think we'd still see strikes. So if the goal is to see no strikes from the Houthis, we'll never attain that. But I do think that we can collectively, internationally, which is an international problem. I mean, this affects countries as far away as China, more so than many of the countries that the Houthis tend to be trying to influence the most. So the international community could come together and mitigate this even more so, but I don't think we'll ever get to a point where there's no threat coming from the Houthis.
Mick, I just want to switch gears, actually. What does the US want to see from the new government in Syria?
So Secretary Blinken, and I don't see this changing that much, but Secretary Blinken said essentially 4 major things. One was, of course, an inclusive government that incorporated all of Syria, all of the different parts of Syria, and was selected by the Syrian people. So I'd say it's going to be disturbing for the United States to hear that they can't hold elections for 4 years. I mean, that sounds to many like an attempt to essentially gain power, keep power, and by the time the 4 years comes around, there will be no elections. But that's one of the main things that the United States would want to see. They'd also, of course, want to see the destruction of all the chemical and biological weapons that we know Syria had, the ones that haven't been destroyed by Israel. And then, of course, the uninterrupted flow of humanitarian aid to all parts of Syria, where there is no attempted use of the restrictions to basically try to gain political favor like we've seen in other places. So I think those are the 3 main points. I don't see them changing much between the administrations, but I think it's not a good sign from the U.S. perspective, this announcement that you all said that basically they announced that they won't have elections for 4 years.
So I just want to touch on something. When we were speaking to the new Syrian leader, Ahmed al-Sharaa, he told us that he wants the US to lift the sanctions that are on the country because, as you said, there is a humanitarian effort that needs to happen, but economically, Syria has really suffered. Do you think the incoming Trump administration could help in this regard, and do you think we'll see those sanctions begin to ease?
So I definitely think that's a good point. A lot of the sanctions, for example, the Caesar sanctions, were on the Assad regime for their atrocities, and they're obviously no longer in charge of Syria. So one could certainly make the argument that those sanctions should go away, as Syria needs that economic influx to reconstruct itself and rebuild from the devastation of the civil war for the last 13 years. I think likely the Trump administration will be headed in that direction, but they'll want to see al-Sharaa and his government, and he's already appointing people into positions from his organization. They want to see this promised way ahead that is inclusive of all elements of Syria, that is chosen by the Syrian people. So an actual election, not just somebody who happened to be able to overtake a despotic regime by force. I think the Trump administration will likely look to see how they are progressing toward that aim, and then it'll reduce or eliminate sanctions respectively with that.
Mick, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We really appreciate it. That's Mick Mulroy, a former United States Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
We'll now take a look at New Year's celebrations around the world. New Zealanders were amongst the first in the world to celebrate the arrival of 2025 with a fireworks display in Auckland. The fireworks show started with a 10-second countdown projected on the base of Auckland's 32-metre-tall Sky Tower. This was followed by fireworks displayed which lasted 5 minutes with more than 500 kilograms of pyrotechnics launched from various firing sites. Sydney has welcomed 2025 with the biggest ever fireworks display featuring a golden waterfall falling from the iconic Sydney Harbour Bridge. The 12-minute display, stretched 7 kilometres along Sydney Harbour, featured 23,000 individual pyrotechnic shots. For the first time, fireworks were launched from 80 new positions on the western side of the Sydney Harbour Bridge. In China, President Xi Jinping's and party officials and also state leaders attended a New Year gala featuring traditional opera shows in Beijing. The performances included parts from the classic opera that depicted heroism and a love for China, while also highlighting the country's ethnic cultures. The city of Leigh-Ann, known as the hometown of fireworks, put on a stunning visual display on the weekend ahead of New Year's. Separately, China's Xi Jinping and Russia's President Vladimir Putin have both exchanged New Year's greetings. Turning to Moscow, where there will be no fireworks once again this year. Earlier this month, Moscow's mayor said that the fireworks will be cancelled again due to the ongoing war with Ukraine. This will mark the third consecutive year the displays have been halted on Russia's biggest family holiday. Celebrations have also been dampened by rising inflation fueled by Russia's war with Ukraine. For more, let's bring in our reporter, Dasha Chernyshova, who joins me right now from Moscow. Dasha, a pleasure to have you on this evening. Vladimir Putin has given his New Year's address, praising the achievements made under his 25-year rule. What more did he have to say?
Yes, indeed, the Russian president has given his New Year address to the Russian public, because keep in mind, Russia is celebrating New Year 11 times and in 11 time zones of this vast country. And in this pre-recorded address, the Russian president said the country will be moving forward in 2025 with confidence. He also reassured Russians that everything will be fine, providing, however, no exact details of how that will be fine. He also has stressed that Russians are thinking about the future future. He praised the courage of the Russian soldiers who are fighting in the ongoing special military operation in Ukraine, and also has stressed that there are many people in Russia whose patriotism is helping country be independent, sovereign and strong. So definitely in this one of the shortest addresses of the Russian president to the Russian public, he did try to set the tone for 2025, suggesting that everything will be okay. But keep in mind that this is taking place against the backdrop of rising inflation, and for New Year holidays, some of the products that are the key ingredients of festive cooking, like butter or red caviar, they have been seeing increasingly high prices, and this is part of the ongoing tendency that we are seeing in the Russian economy at the moment. The runaway inflation, the key interest rate being at the record height of 21%, and at the same time we also understand that the economy is expected to slow down next year, but some economists say that actually that is a good thing. We also have seen some of the public opinion polls here in Russia suggesting that one of the issues that Russians are looking for in 2025 is the stabilization of prices, as well as the tariffs and the improvements in the overall economic situation.
There'll be no fireworks in Moscow again this year on Russia's biggest family holiday. Why have they been cancelled again for another year?
Well, certainly, if you look at the decorations that the Russian capital does have for New Year, you can probably wonder if anything military is taking place for this country, because they are indeed lavish. So the cancellation of those fireworks in Russia is basically in line with the general mood among the Russian population that do not see it appropriate, while the operation is ongoing, to have any sort of these festivities taking place. Meanwhile, we also understand that next year there will be fireworks taking place, because the year of 2025 has been declared the year of the defender of fatherland, because Russia will be celebrating the 80th anniversary in the of the victory of the Soviet Union in World War II, and that is a very important holiday for many Russians. So at this stage, we understand this is part of the general framework that is surrounding Russia's ongoing special military operation in Ukraine. And actually, if you look again at the public opinion polls, because Russians were asked about what they are hoping for 2024, many have said that they are hoping that this will come to an end in 2025 with the Russian victory. And at the same time, there are many Russians who understand that next year there will be many challenges that Russia will have to overcome.
Lots of challenges to overcome, as you say. What is the atmosphere like in Moscow this evening? We see you there as you all prepare to welcome in a new year.
Well, definitely you can, if you go to downtown Moscow, you will definitely see many people who are willing to celebrate. But it is a family holiday, so there are many Russian families who are getting together. The atmosphere is festive because it is a family holiday, because Russia will be free from work for the next week or so. There will be no working days for millions of the Russian population. But also, indeed, they understand that they cannot really plan for long term, because over the past years they have learned here in Russia that planning is a difficult thing, especially in a country that is continuing its military effort in Ukraine. So definitely the atmosphere is festive, but for many families this day has been soured, because some of their relatives are not present, because some of their relatives have to be elsewhere, and also the understanding that there are difficult years ahead. But generally speaking, you can definitely say that many Russians are quite optimistic, or at least realistic, understanding that they are in this situation, and what they have to do is just to be happy with what they have at this moment.
Dasha, Chernyshova in Moscow, thank you so much for joining me, and a very happy new year. I look forward to seeing you in 2025. London is only hours away from welcoming the new year. Last year, more than 100,000 people gathered for iconic fireworks along the Thames. In the UK, preparations are underway for the usual night of fireworks, music and, of course, a bit of drinking. But bad weather has meant some of the celebrations have had to be cancelled, especially in the north of the country. Stuart Smith has more from where London's officials are hoping the weather does stay good enough to launch the New Year's fireworks in just over 3 hours' time.
The British capital will see the largest organised event this year, with 100,000 people expected along the shores of the River Thames to hear Big Ben ring in 2025 and the traditional fireworks celebrations that come right after. It's also what millions will be watching on their TVs at midnight for those staying in, but plenty of others around the country will be out at pubs and clubs or at regional celebrations, usually marked by live music and fireworks. However, this year, a mixture of heavy rain, strong winds and even snow in northern Scotland have led to some fireworks and celebrations being cancelled. Most notably, the outdoor component of Edinburgh's official Hogmanay celebration. The street party, fireworks and open-air concert have been called off due to the danger posed by strong winds. That's also led to train services being cancelled across Scotland, meaning a few more might be staying in this new year than expected. Here in London, authorities continue to monitor conditions but are optimistic the weather will be good enough to mark the new year as intended. Stuart Smith, Arabiya News, London.
Now, in Germany's capital, Berlin, security measures are taking front stage following the deadly Magdeburg Christmas market attack last week. Roadblocks, fences and security cameras have been set up at the Brandenburg Gate, with 65,000 people expected to attend. Over 5,000 police officers will be on duty across the capital. 2024 has been rocked by a series of political, social and economic events which bring to a close an extremely historic and newsworthy year. We wanted to enter 2025 by reflecting on some of those stories from all over the world. Here's Al Arabiya's news selection of the biggest 12 news stories from the year. We begin at number 12. 2024 has been a deadly year for commercial aviation. 318 have been killed in plane crashes or disasters, making it the deadliest since 2018. On to number 11, the UK's Labour Party sweeps to power in a stunning landslide election victory in July and bringing to an end more than 14 years of Conservative Party rule in the country. Number 10, a Russian opposition figurehead Alexei Navalny died of a blood clot in the Arctic prison where he was serving a 3-decade sentence. Number 9, Saudi Arabia was announced as the host nation for the 2034 FIFA World Cup. The kingdom has promised to deliver the tournament of a lifetime as it prepares for hosting the biggest sporting event in the world. Number 8, Iranian President Raisi and the country's foreign minister were killed after the helicopter they were travelling crashed in foggy weather in Iran. Now on to number 7. Elon Musk's SpaceX makes history after successfully catching its super heavy booster rocket on a pair of robotic arms, marking a huge milestone for his goal of putting humans on Mars. Number 6, Israel kills Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar in a destroyed home following a chance encounter in Gaza, just months after the elimination of his predecessor, Ismail Haniyeh, in Iran. Number 5, Russia strikes Ukraine with its new hypersonic missiles after outgoing President Biden allowed Ukraine for the first time to use long-range US missiles to hit deep inside Russian territory in November. Number 4, 26-year-old Luigi Mangione charged with the murder of Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare, America's largest health insurance company. Number 3, the fall of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. The Assad family's 50-year rule in the country was brought to a swift end just 11 days after opposition groups launched an offensive on Aleppo. Coming in at number 2, the elimination of Hezbollah's leadership by Israel in September. What began with the explosion of thousands of booby-trapped pages belonging to Hezbollah militants ended 10 days later with the elimination of the group's leader, Hassan Nasrallah. And now to our biggest story of the year, the sensational comeback of Donald Trump. Despite 2 assassination attempts, court cases and a very tight polling, the former Republican president won the US election in a historic landslide. We'll be covering his inauguration from Washington here on Al-Arabiya on the 20th of January. Stay tuned and I hope you join us. Back to celebrations, and of course it's New Year. In New York, more than 1 million people are expected to attend those celebrations in Times Square. Security in the area has been beefed up, with the police commissioner saying that law enforcement has been operating in a heightened threat environment since the 7th of October.
At this time, there are no specific credible threats to the Times Square New Year's Eve celebration. However, we have been operating in a heightened threat environment since October 7th, and we remain vigilant.
The famous ball drop, an iconic New York City event, has been prepared, this time with a vibrant kaleidoscope of colours over the heart of Manhattan. The ball can display more than 16 million colours and billions of patterns and is illuminated by over 32,000 LEDs. Pretty amazing. We can now go to Caroline Malone, who is in Washington ahead of midnight. Caroline, thank you so much for joining us. A brief test of the drop and confetti was made earlier this week, and we saw the hosts Ryan Seacrest and Rita Ora rehearsing their set. But what can we really expect when the clock strikes midnight tonight?
Well, certainly there will be celebrations across the United States when people are celebrating New Year's Eve in about 11 to 12 hours' time here on the East Coast. But it's also a time for remembrance because of the passing of the former president, Jimmy Carter, who died over the weekend at the age of 100. Lots of flags here being flown at half-mast, including, as you can see behind me, on the White House as well as on Capitol Hill in Congress. A lot of people reflecting on his legacy, of course, living till 100 and only serving one term as president. He had a challenging time while he was in office, but after office as president, he received the Nobel Peace Prize and is lauded for his work in human rights and humanitarian work as well as peace efforts. Now, President Biden, of course, is well aware that there is a big transition about to take place here in the United States, particularly in Washington, D.C., as President Trump will be coming into office in just the 3 weeks after New Year on January 20th, when he is officially inaugurated into the White House. President Biden will also be giving a eulogy speech at President Carter's funeral, which will be held in just 2 weeks' time, less than 2 weeks' time, on January the 9th, also here in Washington, D.C. So it's certainly a time for reflection as well as also looking forward. We are likely to see a lot of change. At least that's what future President Donald Trump has promised. He's promised to reduce taxes. He's threatened to introduce tariffs onto lots of other countries globally, which could have an impact on, international economies across the world. We've also seen him promise more efficiency. He's enlisted the help of Elon Musk, of course, the billionaire tech owner, to help him with that. And there could be a lot of controversies, though, because there seems to be already some division about how they'll handle things like immigration. Elon Musk saying he supports some types of visas to allow people to come to the US. Many Republicans saying, though, that they don't. So we could see a lot happen even in those first few weeks of January as we enter into 2025. Now, one area where the US won't be reducing its spending, that, of course, is in New York, in Times Square, as you've said there, with the ball drop happening. 1 million people set to watch that ball drop and to celebrate as the year changes from 2024 into 25. One other thing we're likely to see is hundreds of people throwing confetti off the buildings onto the crowds down below. Now, people have been enlisted for the last few weeks to write their wishes and their hopes and dreams onto that confetti. So really, a symbolism of optimism and hopefulness for what 2025 can bring.
You've summed up what America can potentially expect going into the new year. You mentioned, what's going to happen in Times Square, but they've really beefed up security. What more do we know about this?
Absolutely. Well, New York is on heightened security alert at the moment. And we've heard just, as we go into these hours of New Year's Eve, that police are going to be having lots of different measures to protect people out on the streets. Among those measures, we've got police officers undercover who are going to be among the crowds. We've got police bringing canine dogs, dog sniffers with them to detect any potential explosive materials. We've also got lots of checkpoints happening throughout all the different crowds. People not allowed to bring sort of big bags in. They're not even allowed to bring umbrellas, even though it's predicted to rain. They'll have to wear ponchos or jackets. So really strong presence on the streets, as well as above. There's going to be drones being used to take a look at crowds from above and make sure that, nothing is happening that could be a threat, as well as police officers out on horses as well. So we are likely to see a really strong police presence out on the streets. But, crowds are already gathering in New York as early as 12 hours before the actual midnight and ball drop happens. So we are likely to see huge crowds there. There's going to be a lot of congestion, but police saying they will do everything they can to make sure, despite this heightened security alert, that people are protected.
I always admire people who go out 10 hours early to see something. It's definitely not me. Caroline Malone in Washington, thank you so much for joining us, and a very happy New Year to you. A reminder of our top stories. US officials have said they would like to see elections held in Syria as soon as possible. The US strikes Houthi targets in Yemen's capital. And the world rings in the new year with spectacular fireworks displays. And that's all from us on W News. Thank you so much for joining us. Riz Khan is coming up next. And don't miss Tom Berger's Watson with GNT. Good night from me and Happy New Year to everybody who's watching.